Well, this is not the first time a call has been made for a new constitution, or at least a new draft constitution for Nigeria. But the question is, will this be the last time? We've been here before, as I said, and let's bring in two young Nigerians who've walked this journey of getting a new constitution, tweaking it in such a way that it favors young Nigerians as well. We're joined on the program by Cynthia Bamalu, who's the Director of Programs, Yaga Africa, as well as Rotimi Olawale, the Executive Director, Youth Hub Africa. Both of them join us from our Abuja studios. Good morning and welcome to the Morning Brief. Well, guys, I'd like us to walk down memory lane, and I'll begin with Cynthia, because you've been here before. You've been a part of a call for an amendment to Nigeria's constitution, a review of sorts. So I'd like us to start from your experience then. It was a major one in 2012. A lot of young Nigerians wanted to participate in this. There were meetings online. There was a lot of groups coming together. But we didn't quite have what we wanted. So it's important to learn from the past and ensure that whatever it is we're doing right now, we're doing it with that knowledge of things that didn't work then. So Cynthia, I'd like you to walk us through your experience then, and then perhaps some of the lessons to pick from then that will move forward. Cynthia.
Thank you and good morning again. I think there's something we need to understand that first, Nigeria has a rigid constitution, which means that the amendment of the constitution in itself is not an easy process. It's almost like the American Constitution. I mean, the American Constitution, there's been over 10,000 proposals to amend the Constitution, and barely 1% of those amendments had gone through since the Constitution has been in existence. And same also in Nigeria. Why am I giving this context? Because the 2012 era, for instance, we actually had a YACOR. We had this Youth Alliance on Constitutional Electoral Reform, and we engaged at this geopolitical zone, because at the time, there were zonal hearings in the 6 geopolitical zones, but before then, there were sub-meetings that happened at state levels to help put together proposals that were a lot more youth-friendly. A lot of conversations around things like the right to education was very paramount then, the rights for young people to contest office, pushing for removal or reduction of age to run for office, citizenship and residency rights conversations were ongoing, and issues around local government autonomy and representation, affirmative action for women and for young people and persons with disabilities. I mean, these were some of the conversations that a lot of young people rallied around at the time. And I know we had presentations at the zonal level in the 6 geopolitical zones when the National Assembly committees deployed for the zonal hearings. And then finally, there was the coordination or combination of all the reports from the zones, which formed the final report, and then the voting at the National Assembly. Remember that to amend the Nigerian Constitution, you need two-third approval from the Senate and the House of Representatives, two-third majority votes, and then you also need two-third of the state houses of assembly to vote in support of each amendment before the assent of the president. And so, while there were a lot of conversations, sadly not all the proposals, majority of the proposals did not make it through, because currently we still have debates around issues of citizenship, residency or indigenship rights. Conversation around local government autonomy is still ongoing. Issues around independent candidacy is still ongoing. Issues around rights, certain rights in Chapter 2 becoming parts of Chapter 4 or justiciable, or making certain rights in Chapter 2 justiciable, those issues are still strive. And then now we have issues around security, which is still a major issue in this conversation. So while not all provisions went through, there's something we've learned from 2012, and is that when it comes to amendments of the Constitution, most times it's almost seen as an elite conversation. And how does it happen? We have National Assembly set up committees, to amend the Constitution. And I do worry that in almost every assembly that we've seen, there's been an attempt to amend the Constitution, but the conversation honestly is there a political will to truly galvanize citizens and get input from the people to truly have a citizens informed amendment to the constitution? And that is where there is a problem, because from 2012 a lot of the proposals that were made did not make it to the final voting, because it has to go through the through the several stages of legislative amendments, and at the point of third reading, a lot of those proposals from the zonal level did not make it in. It seemed like political interest once again was superseded that of national interest. And so from that lesson from 2012 to the current proposal, to the current amendment process, if there's something we must learn is for this amendment process to truly reflect the wishes of the people, that we need a National Assembly to understand that the proposals from the people from different parts of the country must make the final document that gets to the point and to the third reading for voting, and that voting is done in the interest of the people, not just individual interest of National Assembly members.
Absolutely, Cynthia. And let me come to Rotimi Olawale now. The point of this conversation is to also set the agenda, in the sense that young people are the ones that will live with this constitution for a longer period. For a lot of people, the older generation, they wouldn't live with this constitution if there will be a new constitution for as long as young Nigerians. Some of the young Nigerians will live with this constitution for 60, 70 plus years. So it's important to have the input of young Nigerians who make a huge chunk, or who make up a huge chunk of the nation's population. But haven't seen all of the groundwork you guys did then. I'd like to just take a peek into your experience. They always ask, what do women want? And I'd like to turn this now to young people in Nigeria. What have you found out to be what young Nigerians want when it comes to the Constitution?
I think that the first and foremost is to say that what we currently have is not working absolutely for anyone, and that's what you've seen in the last couple of weeks when young Nigerians have come on the street to protest and say Nigeria as it is today is not working for us, we're not getting jobs, we're not being fed, and we have a lot of challenges within the polity and within the system. And so if you ask me what the young people want, I think following on and piggyback on what Cynthia has mentioned, in 2012 there are quite a number of proposals on the table. For me specifically, I was very concerned about the section on chapter 2 which talks about education, and which people will tell you is not justiciable. And we have a huge educational problem in Nigeria where we have over 14 million out of school children, and this is a big issue that needs to be dealt with. So how do we ensure we guarantee the rights of children and young people to education in Nigeria? That's a big issue that we need to tackle going forward. And then when you look at also some of the provisions also you see in other climes where you have a high percentage of women in parliament, in Nigeria it's very low. I think in Senate it's about 3%. And also you see in other climes also specific seats allocated to young people, to women, to persons with disabilities. These are some of the proposals that have been put forward in the constitutional review process that we took part in 2012. And I must tell you that a lot of organizing goes into getting young people to even sit at the table and consider what do we want to do. And the world has changed 2012 to 2024. It's been 12 years. In 2012 it was early days of social media organizing. We did a Twitter conversation, but now there are many more young people on social media, and we need to have a larger conversation on how do we make Nigeria work for the entire populace. I know that the patriots who met with the president proposed also issues around referendum, but even a referendum has to be subjected to a constitutional review process, and that's something that has not also been accepted in previous constitutional amendment process in Nigeria, and that process may also become difficult. I think for me, one of the things that perhaps might be easy is about devoluting more powers to the regions. Nigeria already is informally grouped into the 6 geopolitical zones. Anything you want to do in Nigeria, everybody talks about the 6 geopolitical zones. Even when government want to consult with people, they go around the 6 geopolitical zones. And I think that that's some assemblage that is already accepted, even if it's not currently in our constitution? How do we devolve more powers into the zones? How do we empower the zones more? But there are also questions that people are going to ask you. One of it is about resource control. How do we allow the zones to control their resources? The second thing is also about IGR. As it is today, there are only about 5, 6, 7 states which generate at least 40% of their expenses from IGR. Many of them rely heavily on allocation from the federation account. And so when you say you are devolving more powers into the zone, are you asking them to generate their own resources? This is going to be one of the thorny issues as you consider constitutional review in this climb.
All right, Mrs. Mbamalu, I like the fact that Mr. Lawale had touched something around women in government, which is my next question to you, Ms. Mbamalu. Let's talk about women's participation in government. If you look at Rwanda, for example, more than 60% of more than 60% of people in government are women. And I was opportune to ask the Rwandan president about how things worked out. If you look at where they're coming from after the genocide to where they are currently, I mean, it's a very big difference. And it was just about working more with women. So what would you like to see in this new constitution about women participation, about things affecting women, policies that can drive, maybe not gender equality this time, but something to at least put women on the pedestal where they can actually do something good and make a difference in government and in the economy?
Well, I would like to begin with something. No, you said something and said maybe not equality. And our constitution actually talks about 3 principles: freedom, justice, and equality. And if there's something that has been a major challenge in even our configuration as a country, is that sense of injustice and that sense of inequality. And it cuts across geopolitical zones, across ethnic and religious divides, but more importantly, across gender lines. And that is because as it is currently, we have a constitution that yes, promotes that principle of equality and talks about non-discrimination. But if you think about the composition of government, it's not a reflection of a society where we have men and women. And so if you ask me what would be the proposals, in the 9th Assembly, there were 5 important gender bills that did not make it through. And I do believe that these bills need to be reintroduced in the 10th Assembly. I know one of them has gone through second reading, the reserved seats bill. But maybe I'll begin with the very simple one, citizenship. This is a country where in the constitution, as a Nigerian, women have lesser rights as citizens than men. And what do I mean by this? Currently in the constitution, a Nigerian man who gets married to a foreign woman can confer citizenship to his wife. But a Nigerian woman who gets married to a foreign man cannot confer citizenship to her husband. What it means is for several Nigerians who are married to even as close to Ghana, their husbands are from Ghana, Togo, Benin Republic, just very, I'm not going far to the west, just within this country. They can't confer citizenship rights to their husbands. So what it means is already that particular section undermines the quality of citizenship of a woman and subjects or creates a sense of second-class citizenship within the constitution. And that was a simple proposal that I felt did not even need debate. If constitution talks about equality and that we're all created equally and that we have fundamental rights which every citizen must enjoy, then there shouldn't be a provision that limits a right that a citizen who is a man enjoys and limits it to only men, and women can't enjoy that right. So that simple provision requires an amendment where, as Nigerians, you are not restricted on who you should get married or who you should fall in love with. That you can confer citizenship as long as you're Nigerian. You don't have to be a man to do that. The issues around representation is key. We cannot have a government where women are not part of decision making. And so there are proposals currently, one, to create additional seats or to ensure affirmative action in the composition of the National Assembly and state assemblies. Currently, 13 states in Nigeria have no woman in their state assemblies, meaning we have state assemblies that are all men in a country where women are almost half the population. Then we talked about appointments. That is also the proposals. Our national gender policy talks about at least 30%, 35% affirmative action for appointive positions. Currently, we have a government where at appointments at the national and state level, we are struggling to even have 10% women. At the most, what we've had is about 18% at the national level. And so that in itself does not even promote the principles of equality, justice, and freedom expounded in the Constitution. And then talk about issues of indigenship and citizenship rights. We live in a country where some women are stateless in a country that they are citizens. How do I mean? You have situations where a woman she's from one state and marries into another state. Now, where the opportunities, especially employment opportunities, scholarship opportunities for education, educational purposes, appointment positions, and you know that most of those are done based on your states of origin. You have situations where women have been denied those opportunities either because their state of origin denied them and said, oh, you've been married into another state, so go to your husband's state. Then they go to their husband's state. The husband says, oh, you belong to, go back to your father's state. So it's like you're creating a sense of statelessness in a country where we are citizens. And the proposal was, if women marry, men are not subjected to this disadvantage. And so when a woman marries into another state or is married to someone from another state, she should be given the right to choose one of the states as her state and not be denied opportunities just because she married into another state, especially when our constitution promotes national integration and national unity. So, and then I think the last proposal was around executive leadership of political parties, because we have political parties that the only position they give women is a national women leadership position. And we know that to win elections in Nigeria, political parties are the platform to contest and win elections. And the proposal is to amend it to provide that at least when it comes to executive position in political parties, 35% is reserved for women. They contest and they get those seats so that women are part of the decision-making processes within political parties. So if you ask me, there are opportunities in the Constitution to create spaces for women. And you mentioned Rwanda, Kenya. We have countries in Africa that have adopted that. And there are different ways to legislate quotas. And Nigeria has an opportunity to do that because we can no longer continue to talk about equality and a country that belongs to all Nigerians if women are not treated as if they are equal Nigerians. And honestly, issues around development and all of the challenges we are dealing with are still persisting because decision and policy making is done from one lens. Until we have men and women make decisions of developmental issues in Nigeria, we would not see results. All right, you can't be flying, a bird can't be flying with one wing and expect to get to its destination. And I think that is an important conversation for this amendment process.
Absolutely, and we're all for the women because you even add the part of change of name issues when it comes to marriage and certificate. There are myriads of issues when it comes to advocating for women. Let's take it to Mr. Olawale. And let's take it way back to what brought this conversation. Chief Anyoko and the Patriot are actually calling for a few things. They are saying they are trying to propose to the president, so send a bill to the National Assembly to do two things. So convene a constituent assembly made up of maybe ethnic nationality or people that will be elected from states. And then also within that, let there be a legislation around referendum, whatever is being drafted. So this Constituent Assembly will come up with a draft constitution that will now be subjected to a referendum. Because the argument from the older generation is the fact that the last time we had a real affirmative plebiscite was in 1963, the way the Midwest was created from the West. That every other arrangement from our amalgamation to the 1999 Constitution, we were all not on the table. So my question is, do we need an entirely new constitution, or we should go through this piecemeal of Section 8 and 9 to amend it as we've always done? Because they are advocating, throw this document away, give us a new document that is quite representative, just like we had with the affirmative plebiscite in 1963 to create the Midwest region.
I think the process to create an entire new constitution is going to be fraught with a lot of challenges and problems. I read the proposal by the group of patriots, and let me go to the second proposal. The second proposal talks about a bill to the National Assembly to create a referendum process. That bill in itself, I don't think is going to pass through, because that in itself requires a constitutional amendment process. So first, you have to first amend the constitution, the current constitution, to allow for a referendum process before you then come back to discuss about creating a new constitution in its entirety. I listened to elder statesman Emeka Nyako talk about electing three persons and non-partisan from each of the states. That is also going to be very problematic. One, are you going to ask current members of the National Assembly not to contest? Are you going to ask political parties not to organize around these? And how do you elect? Of course, you're going to ask INEC as perhaps the only body that can conduct such an election. And so there are many challenges around it. I think for me, the important thing is to look at what we currently have and see ways and means that we can improve our current constitution. And we have done so over the years. If you look at, for instance, how INEC has been created, the Electoral Act, we've seen various amendments to the Electoral Act. It might not have been perfect as what we have today, but we've seen very specific improvement from what we have when the Electoral Act was initially passed to the current version that we use now. And so organizing a Constituent Assembly, we've seen all kinds of assemblies that have been organized in Nigeria. What happens to the report? We organize them, they're expensive, people come to Abuja, they sit, they debate over days and days and days, and sometimes when you see the proposals that are coming out of this, one of the biggest things that come out of constitutional amendment process is creation of more states. Every region in Nigeria wants to create more states. And you see, I think in the last process, I think there were over 40 proposals to create additional states. That's just going to increase more overheads. And that's what happens when you bring politicians together to discuss about creating new constitution. Everybody is looking for political opportunities. How do we create an opportunity for me to have my clan as a state, so that it increases my chance to become a governor, increases my chance to become a parliamentarian? Nobody's fighting for what truly benefits the Nigerian people. In my own sense, we have a constitution. It's not perfect. We continue to build on what we have. We need to have the voices of citizens represent more in our constitutional amendment process. So as a person, I support any process that creates opportunities for Nigerians to vote in a referendum, and we need to organize ourselves in that way. We also need to have more powers to our current state or to the region as a whole. We have issues around security. Security being organized at the central in Abuja is not enough. That has been facing a lot of problems. We need to think around how we organize security better at the state and local level to deliver more goods for the people. Our local government has been in shambles for years. I'm happy that conversations around local government autonomy is picking up speed at the moment. We've seen some traction. We're not yet there, but there are other levers we can move to ensure that we separate the local government financial control from the hands of state governors, and that they can respond to challenges at the local level, and that this can be driven. Finally, also the issues around independent candidature. Running an election through political parties is very expensive. People will tell you, if you want to run in any of the big political parties, you spend 60–70% of your budget running for primaries. You know, and people will tell you, my friends who run for office will tell you, nobody supports you when you are running for primaries. Everybody wants to support you after you've won the primaries, and then you spend a lot of money organizing a primary. But if you want to run a local election, if you believe you're popular in your state, in your zone, and you can mobilize by yourself as an independent candidate, I think these are some of the things that we need to infuse into our current constitution to allow people, young people, women, to test their popularity, to mobilize, to organize within their community, and be able to represent their people at various levels of government.
You know, I guess there are a lot of people watching right now with different mindsets. For some, they're like, we've been here before. Don't just raise our hopes. We say constitution review. We've seen what happened in the previous assemblies and how we went to the states and fell through. Some are like, this is even too complex for me. Okay, so I'd allow the people in government do this. Whatever they come out with, we're fine with it. And the goal of this is to sort of unify all of those minds and ensure that we all put in work to bring out a constitution that works, at least for our nation, Nigeria. So I'd like both of you to quickly speak on this point. From your previous experience, who are the people or what institutions have you seen to be the most powerful to either achieving success or otherwise when it comes to constitutional amendment or review? This is not to draw a target on their back, but just to know those institutions or people that at least we need to, would I say, lobby or relate with or engage such that we achieve success. I'll begin with Cynthia, then I'll come to you. Who are those powerful people or institutions we need to pay attention to?
Well, I have an unpopular opinion, and it's honestly like, Kayode, our constitution as it is, if we had political leaders that want to get the job done, if we had good leadership, this constitution will be implemented and every Nigerian will benefit from the resources. But the problem is we have leaders who get into office and want to use their powers for their own interest. Local government autonomy, Supreme Court did not even need to give us a judgment for us to know that local governments are autonomous by the Constitution, that elections need to happen at that local level. But governors go in and start behaving like dictators and want everybody to be bowing to them, and they complain yet of the federal interference, while they are also not allowing local governments to be independent. And so if you ask me, honestly, I do believe that the power is with the people. Why do I say so? National Assembly has the powers to amend the Constitution, but they are representing different constituencies. They are representing we, the people of Nigeria. And so if we think about having a constitution that works, getting sections that are meant to favor the interest of the people, and I think Nigerians, we need to hold our National Assembly members, the Senate and the House, our lawmakers in those two chambers, to push proposals that favors the people. This amendment process, for instance, we don't just want a piecemeal conversation where you just have a public hearing that is not well publicized. We want to have conversations with minimal budget costs. Because whenever I talk about this, National Assembly thinking of big monies they want to spend, and then they spend so much money and do nothing. What we are looking for, you can actually organize town hall meetings in your constituencies and meet your constituents and ask what are the proposals, and whatever comes from those town hall meetings, you bring it to the national, and those are the things that forms the conversation before you go through the other processes that leads to a public hearing. And town hall meetings are easy to organize. Almost every community in Nigeria has a town hall, and so they don't need a big hotel or a big facility or to spend big monies to travel to do that. And so I do believe that if you ask me where lies the power, honestly, I don't have as much faith in the president, because I'm not those ones. I'm not going to be begging the president to do things. He's elected. He ought to be good to do things because he's elected. Or the National Assembly. All I'm saying is we need the lawmakers to go back to their constituencies, engage the people, get the proposals from that level, come back to the national level, and then we have the legislative process that leads to the amendments of the proposal. And this engagement should also happen at the state level, because to amend the constitution, you need the state assemblies to also vote in support. Unfortunately, state governors do not even allow state assemblies to be independent enough to vote for proposals that will favor the nation, which is why local government autonomy keeps failing when it gets to the state level. And I'm hoping that this time around, Nigerians also make demands on their governors to let the system work for the people. And so when it comes to the amendments, I believe that the power lies with Nigerian people, but we need to make those demands on the government, on our representatives at the National Assembly and then at the state level, because these bills would end up coming back to the state level. But honestly, this can be achieved with minimal cost, and I'm emphasizing on cost because the budget that is spent on constitutional amendment every assembly it's worrying, and it's really sad because so much monies are spent doing nothing, and that in itself is a major problem we have with leadership in Nigeria.
Maybe you can respond to the same question that Kayode asked before I throw in one question, maybe in 30 seconds. Let's Olawale, your response to Kayode's question.
I think for me that what we have currently in Nigeria is what I would call elite capture. You have many political groups, political parties, associations who have captured the political process in Nigeria. And when it comes to having the loudest voices, or when it comes to representation, or when it comes to presenting their proposals, these are the loudest voices that you hear within the polity. And an instance is the current protest that was organized in the first week of August. You can see that there's a discommunication between elected representatives and people who are yearning and saying Nigeria is not working for us. And if if you have people in the National Assembly who have constituencies, they should have been hearing from their constituencies and going to the National Assembly to say, this is what we're hearing from our constituency. People are very angry, people are hungry, but we're not hearing that. And so there's an elite capture of our political process. You have socio-cultural groups who are very powerful. You have political parties who are very powerful. You have the elite group of governors, the Governors Forum, who are very powerful. And we have a former governor who is now the president of Nigeria, who is part of that, what they call the 1999 group of elite governors who is now in power. And so you have that group of governors who are very powerful. And so this elite capture is what we've seen in Nigeria. And that's why I support the process of a referendum that transfers a lot of power to ordinary citizens to be able to have a say in the constitutional amendment process, not the ones that go only to the state houses of assembly where the governors has a lot of say, and it goes to the National Assembly where they do not consult as much as possible their constituency. But you have a referendum process that puts power in the hands of citizens for them to decide and say, this is what we support, and we can feel the pulse of ordinary citizens within the constitution process.
Let me come back to you, Cynthia. I did ask Olawale this question, but let me bring it back to you about whether or not we need a new constitution. One of the things Chief Emeka Anyoko, the statesman, raised was the fact that we need to be sensitive to our pluralistic composition as a country. He cited Czechoslovakia, Slovenia, I think as well as Sudan, which didn't appeal to this composition, and they disintegrated over 100 years period or more. And then he cited India and Canada, who respected this heterogeneous situation, and now they are still strong as a country. So the question I asked Olawale, is it a new constitution or this amendment we're talking about?
Well, I think there are several conversations here. There's issues around the economy, and I think our challenge, honestly, most times we think the only way to solve our problems is to change the constitution. If we get a new constitution and still have the same mindset of leadership, and we don't have a constitutional culture, we will still have the same challenges that we're having. And why do I say that? For me, it's not necessarily about having a new constitution. You can't stop a tree by growing by plucking its fruit. There's a fundamental question of inequality and injustices that a lot of people agree from different sections of the society. And so that is a different conversation that is not necessarily a constitutional conversation. It's a conversation around leadership and how leadership has failed over a long period of time. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is issues around our federal system needs to be truly addressed this time around. And because it's not necessarily going the path of the Czechoslovakia method, it's about how do we design a federal system that works for Nigeria. India's federal system works for India. The same way Germany or Canada, it works for them. But Nigeria, we have our own unique peculiarities and we have our own levels of diversities. And so when we talk about a federal system, I'm hoping that this amendment process will truly devolve power in such a way that we can begin to see a sense of federalism that works for Nigeria. And that is about how powers are properly devolved within the federal, state, and even the local government autonomy. Because at that lower level, we are not experiencing governance. Because there's no sense of development happening at that level. If we begin to address those simple things as how do we ensure we have a federal system that works for Nigeria, and then issues around dealing with the sense of inequality that persists in our system, if we address that, I do believe that a lot of Nigerians will begin to feel connected to this idea of Nigeria. And honestly, I don't have an issue with the proposals from the Patriot, but I also think in all of this conversation, the youth voices are still missing. And if you ask me, Nigerians' median age is approximately 18 years, meaning that the people of Nigeria now, majority are young people. Any conversation that does not have people born at least in the late 80s, early 90s, and 2000s as part of those conversations is not a conversation for the Nigerian people, because it's excluding the majority of the Nigerians. And so we also need to be like what Rotimi said, this elite capture of spaces. I think we also need to break that down to get youth voices back into the conversation.
And that is why here at Channels Television will ensure that all the voices are heard, particularly young Nigerians in this case. This is why we're having this conversation, essentially. We would like to thank you so much, Cynthia Bamalu, Director of Programs, Yaga Africa, as well as Rotimi Olawale, Executive Director, Youth Hub Africa. It looks like you guys are back to the trenches now with this Constitution review. So see you in the trenches, guys. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
We'll take a moment now, and when we return, we'll get the perspective of, well, a senior legal person. This one you do not want to miss. Stay with us.